The first 3 episodes of this series has been filled with technicalities like payloads, engines, first stage, second stage, jettison, max Q, and so on. While I enjoyed doing all the researches and making those informations easily understandable for my audience, I'm also trying to find something that is a little bit more lighthearted and fun. So today, in the final episodes of the SpaceX series, let's talk about the haters of SpaceX. In decreasing significance, they are ULA, which is a joint venture between Boeing and Lockheed Martin, Arianespace, as well as service providers like Time Warner and Comcast. You might have some questions about this list and why the listed companies hate SpaceX. Just hold on to your questions. I promise that you will have all your questions answered at the end of the video. So without further ado, I'm Lei, let's get into the video. In an industry full of middleman price hikes and decade-old equipment, SpaceX's tightly controlled in-house supply chain and the cutting-edge technology has made it the world's cheapest option for space delivery. For years, the US government has relied on 2 major aerospace companies, Boeing and Lockheed Martin, along with their joint venture United Launch Alliances for domestic launches. United Launch Alliances charges the government, the US taxpayers, around $380 to $420 million per launch. For a similar launch, the US government only pays SpaceX around $133 million. For launches with other customers without all the NASA restrictions, SpaceX charges $60 million per launch only. Given the unbelievable bargain, SpaceX unsurprisingly has a long line of customers being on their services. They currently have a backlog of over 50 planned launches, worth over $5 billion. They are doing everything they can to ramp up production, aiming to soon make 40 Falcon 9s a year. Musk believes that within a few years, SpaceX will cost less than a tenth of the industry average, and he believes SpaceX can take over the majority of the world's commercial launches. This has put a lot of pressure on the shoulders of ULA. Over the years, they have gathered significant influences over the decision makers in the DoD, but the significant price difference has brought a lot of changes to the space industry. Military satellite launches in America is a multi-billion-dollar business, and so far it has been monopolized by ULA. But it has become harder and harder to justify the $200 million overcharge per launch from ULA now that it has a formidable competitor. This makes the ULA the first hater of SpaceX, bringing a lot of resistance to the development of the SpaceX. The second hater on the list is a company you probably haven't even heard of. It's called Arianespace. It's kind of like a European version of ULA, except that it specializes in commercial launches, especially geostationary transfer orbit launches. Just like ULA, Arianespace has been enjoying its monopoly status for quite some time now, consistently taking up more than 50% of the commercial launch industry. However, in order to maintain its status facing the competition from SpaceX, it has already been receiving subsidies from European governments. The governments have made it clear that Arianespace has to drive down the cost significantly, and the subsidies will not go on forever. So the success of the battle depends on whether Arianespace could make the necessary structural changes before the inevitable happens. The structural changes unavoidably involves retrenchments at the most fundamental level. Decades of monopoly has made the entire company risk-averse and its workforce unsuited for innovation. This naturally makes Arianespace the second hater of SpaceX. On a more serious note, it is a systematic failure coming from all parts. The governments, regulatory agencies, and the companies that resulted in the current situation where the old giants are unable to fit into the new innovative and competitive environment. SpaceX is simply a manifestation of and a cure for the symptom. I personally don't think ULA and Arianespace could make the transition, but just don't hate on SpaceX. If it's not SpaceX, it might be Space Y or Rocket X or whatever. A change in the space industry is inevitable now. Some of you might be baffled by my claim at the beginning that the cable companies are also hating on SpaceX, so let me explain. End of last year, SpaceX has outlined its plan to send 4,425 satellites to space to provide a wide range of broadband and communication services for the world. Google and Fidelity has invested $1 billion earlier last year to support this aim to bypass the cable and internet providers once and for all. Nowadays, telcos all around the world have shifted from making money with phone calls to making money with the data, so with SpaceX sending satellites to the space competing with the traditional telcos, it is really hard for them to win. Hence, they are the third bunch of haters of SpaceX. The last group of haters are so far imaginary, and I am going to purposely make them ambiguous because we cannot fully comprehend the momentum SpaceX is bringing. So I cannot pinpoint which are the ones that will hate SpaceX in the future. What I do know is that if SpaceX continues to do what it has envisioned, it could bring tremendous shift to our society and changes to many collateral industries. This particular interview explained the reason for that.
So the trick isn't figuring out how to get to orbit, it's figuring out how to get to orbit cheaply.
So I had to come up with low-cost ways to produce engines, the primary structure, the electronics, do the launch operation, as well as run the company with very little overhead. And the sum of inventions in all those areas is what has led us to a roughly 3- to 4-fold improvement over the cost of other rockets in the United States.
What SpaceX has been very successful at is taking basically off-the-shelf technology, stuff that was developed by NASA 50 years ago, and streamlining it. So in that way, he's kind of the Henry Ford of space, because Henry Ford didn't invent the automobile, he just figured out how to make the automobile, commercially viable.
What Henry Ford has brought to the world is not just cars for common folks like us. He also changed the process cars were made. More roads and bridges were built because of that. Better transportation infrastructure in turn made goods delivery possible, etc. Ford's transformative impact is huge, but this is only analysis in hindsight. I think the same thing is happening for SpaceX. Although we don't yet fully comprehend the potential of accessible space travel, the lowered cost and those innovative technologies eventually would bring a lot of changes to our society. Since the topic of today's video is about haters of SpaceX, I'll be obliged to say that these changes would create haters in some traditional industry we might not have even thought of. But overall, I believe 100% that these changes would bring super positive impact to our world, especially the way we travel and the way we communicate.
She packed my bags last night, pre-flight.
Thank you so much for watching. I think there are a lot to the space industry and SpaceX in particular. My mini-series on SpaceX can't possibly cover everything, so I'll link some useful sites down below. This is the 4th edition to my SpaceX series. If you have not watched the previous episode, you can do so by clicking on the boxes on the screen right now. Again, I'm Lei. Till next time.
And I think it's gonna be a long, long time till touchdown brings me round again to find I'm not the